Okay. So, we're now recording. Hello and welcome. So, this is our Epiphany class called Shaping the Communion, 5 vignettes that define who we are as a church. And so, obviously, this class will be about Anglicanism and what makes us who we are. And so, here's just a few random pictures. I believe this one with all the bishops is Justin Welby's installation. He was the last Archbishop of Canterbury, stepped down at the beginning of 2025. We still don't have one technically yet. But the first woman is to be appointed, though she's kind of there's been some controversy from some mishandling of stuff for her as well. So we'll see what will happen. Then this is a picture of a church women conference in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken. And then this is an ordination of this priest. It was not named, but that's Thabo Makaba, who is the Archbishop of Cape Town. But so, let me move this. My hopes for the class, that you all know what Anglicanism is. I know you're probably not supposed to end it on a verb, but c'est la vie. But yeah, we are this unique form of Christianity, and so I hope that you have a deeper understanding of what it means to be an Anglican and how we differ, to understand how our communion develops. So the Episcopal Church is a part of this broader sisterhood of churches, as we call them, called the Anglican Communion. And so just kind of defining how we became a communion, what it means to be a part of this communion, and what that means, again, for our faith, to understand the core of all of this and interesting parts of history that might spark further questions or inquiry. So, first off, what is Anglicanism? Who has a definition? Okay, the Church of England. When did it start? Okay. Any other stabs, or anyone on Zoom, any stabs about what Anglicanism is and what it means?
I was thinking Elizabeth first.
Okay, Elizabeth.
She's trying to combine Augustine and avoid war.
Because we only have the computer mic, I will reiterate. Kathy Irish mentioned Elizabeth and how she kind of combined the Protestant and Catholic sects within England together. Any other stabs?
Henry VIII.
Henry VIII, okay. Yep.
Split away from the Roman Catholic Church, correct?
Yep, his big notorious break from the church so that he could get his divorce. We will be talking about that, though, next week. But so here's the definition from the Episcopal Glossary. It's kind of lengthy, isn't it? We don't need to read the whole thing, but I did highlight a few words. So I'll read at least the first sentence. This way of life is the system of doctrine and approach of polity of Christians in the communion with the See of Canterbury. The term derives from the word which is a variant of forms, refers to the people of the British Isles, and especially the English. Anglicanism reflects the balance and compromise of the via media of the Elizabethan settlement between Protestant and Catholic principles. So, were there any words that popped out that you didn't pick up on? Probably polity. So polity is how a church governs itself. So there is some unique ways that the Anglican churches tend to govern themselves in that we're independent but interdependent. So it's just a fancy way of saying the Church of England doesn't dictate what the Episcopal Church does, but we do have a common bond and we work together.
Mm-hmm.
And then via media. Have you heard that term before? So it's Latin for via being the way, media being middle. And that was kind of the term that Elizabeth used when reestablishing the Church of England as an independent church. Her famous quote was, "I'm not trying to build a window into men's souls," so kind of making a church that is the middle way in between the 2 points of Protestantism and Catholicism. So finding the happy medium where maybe not everyone's happy, but everyone can live with it. And so that's mentioned quite a few times in this definition. At the end, the via media of Anglicanism is expressed frequently in terms of a golden mean between extreme positions on either side of various issues. Anglicanism is both traditional and dynamic in the discovery of new expressions. It retains the ancient authorities of Scripture and tradition. It also allows for the development of new understandings of Christian faith and practice in continuity with the historical church. So, some very similar themes of holding on to the past and tradition, but allowing for different ways of understanding that and interpreting it, and even possibly discovering different ways or ways of understanding how our faith functions and understanding where God might be calling us in this moment. So this, again, is the definition from the Episcopal Glossary, which was down about 2 hours ago. So you can't actually access it, but if you just do the Episcopal Church Glossary, it will take you to the church website where you can find a lot of these random terms. Some definitions like this are really helpful, some are not. If I'm being 100% honest. Yes?
What is the See of Canterbury?
Okay, so the question was on the See of Canterbury. So bishops have a see. So it's kind of like referring to the land and the position that they take. It's called a see sometimes. And so we are in communion with the See of Canterbury. So that means that we recognize the Archbishop of Canterbury as having a spiritual leadership for us, not a church, not a political one now. So it's not like the Archbishop of Canterbury can say, "Hey, Episcopal Church, you need to do this now." The Archbishop of Canterbury has no authority to do that.
It's not like the Pope.
I guess not in the current affirmation of the Pope, no. He is not like the Pope, or they. We should use they because, it can be women now. Seeing that the next one, again, is going to be Sarah Malali. Maybe, again. We'll see how this month goes for all of that. I have some friends in the Scottish Episcopal Church and the Church of England who are well informed. So we will see what happens with Sarah Malali. It would be cool, though, for her to become the first woman Archbishop of Canterbury, though. It made a lot of big waves within the communion, but I think it's going to be good. But so anyway, the See of Canterbury is recognizing that spiritual leadership that the Archbishop of Canterbury has over the communion. That we're going to be talking more about the structure of the Anglican Communion in Class 5. But one of the primary tenets is the Archbishop of Canterbury. They call things called the Lambeth Conference, which is where all the bishops in every Anglican church meet about every 10 years. They're the head of the Primates Conference because the Archbishop of Canterbury is the primate or the chief bishop of the Church of England. And they had the Anglican Consultative Council, which kind of figures out how we work together as church, as independent churches around the world. And then the last one is the Archbishop of Canterbury themselves. Those are the 4 tenets of the communion.
So
So you look at a map and you look at Episcopal Church. So in Africa, the Anglican Church.
Yep.
Does the Archbishop of Canterbury then have a different relationship with the Anglican Church in Africa than with the Episcopal in the United States, or is it kind of the same thing? In other words, would the Canterbury Church just be in the Church of England, would it, as far as dictating policy?
In the Church of England, yeah. I mean, within reason, yeah.
But for instance, in Africa or.
It depends. I have a slide on that. So you're at least two slides ahead. Fair. Are there any questions on Zoom? I guess Lori's question was how does the Archbishop of Canterbury relate to other churches, say in Africa or Asia? And I have a slide on that in two slides. Oops. So Canon Chuck Robertson, he has a definition. He was one of my professors, or at least teachers, because he had a full-time job. He has since retired from it as the canon to the ordinary, which is generally seen as the chief. Okay, we're back. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I think we lost internet for a second. Can y'all hear me? I can. What? I can't really hear them. It is being recorded though, so at a minimum, y'all can watch it again on the YouTube. Okay. Okay, so before this crash, I was describing that Canon Chuck was one of my teachers in seminary. I had evening classes with him, and his title was the Canon to the Ordinary to the Presiding Bishop. He was that for both Presiding Bishop Catherine Jeffert Shorey, the first woman PB for the Episcopal Church. Okay, sorry, I don't know why this keeps on happening. And I have a feeling it's going to happen again. Okay. Canon Chuck. Yep. So how Michael Curry. So Canon Charles K. Robertson. So he was one of my professors. He was the presiding bishop's canon to the ordinary, and that job was beyond the Episcopal Church. That was kind of the secondary for canon to the ordinary, was beyond the Episcopal Church. So he was working with our sister churches in the communion. He did all ecumenical stuff and interreligious stuff. So our work with the Mormons was interreligious because we don't consider them Christian. Yep, we don't say that they believe in the Trinity. So for them, it's interfaith work, but for us working with the Orthodox, that would be ecumenical. Very confusing. But anyway, so in one of my classes, these were the three things that you said defined Anglicanism: changing continuity, something old, something new. So it's obvious we had a whole big break with Rome at some point, kind of reformed, looking at the Reformed tradition to make our own changes within our church. But we still have the continuity of bishops, which is very unique compared to other Protestant faiths. And we still practice the ancient services, which some of our Protestant siblings do not anymore, or not as often as we do. Bonds and boundaries, autonomy and interdependence. So as I explained earlier, within the Anglican Communion, all of the churches recognize each other as sister churches to the one mother of the Church of England. But they can't dictate what we do. But we all recognize each other, and we all value each other's relationship with one another. And we work together around the world. Our second Advent here, we brought in Episcopal Relief and Development, and they do a ton of work around the communion, aiding and supporting churches and people within the Anglican Communion. So we work in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, all over the world, and vice versa. They help us, we meet each other for prayer regularly as a communion. And then rules and relationship, honoring truth and honoring unity. The last one has been a lot more complicated recently, but as I will show, there have been some disharmony throughout the communion at times, and it's taken moments to turn and find new ways of being in unity with one another. But so this was how Canon Chuck, who literally was our main man for 18 years in the Episcopal Church, working with the Anglican Communion. And so, Lori, here is a map of the Anglican Communion. So purple are all churches within the communion. The blue are something called the Porvo Communion. Porvo. It's not exactly important, but essentially it means we recognize their services, but we don't have any historical ties to each other. Through Denmark, yes. The Scandinavian churches kept bishops, so we recognize their historic episcopacy, which gets to the further down point. But yeah, so Greenland has the Danish church as their mother church, and so we're in full communion with Greenland's church. So we recognize each other's bishops, their pastors have certain authority called apostolic succession, which is a fancy way of saying we know your lineage from your bishop. So all bishops can technically trace their lineage all the way down to an apostle. So we have this sense of continuity that the faith given to the apostles has been given to bishops, which has been given to bishops for the last 2 millennia. And so here's a map, though, of the communion. All the purple is the Anglican Communion. India is slightly unique. It is a part of the communion, but all of their churches, all of their Protestant churches formed into one. I guess 2 separate unifications in India. There's North India and South India. But like the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Lutherans, and the Anglican churches all merged in. So they have a Book of Common Prayer. They're part of the Anglican Communion. Some say they aren't. It gets very confusing. But then there's also the Anglican and the Maritoma Church, which is one of the oldest churches. It can date its way all the way back to Thomas the Apostle. There's myth, which might honestly be very true, that Thomas the Doubter made it his way all the way to the Indus River and literally started a church. So when the British missionaries came saying, we're bringing Christianity, it was already there. They literally found churches, the Maritoma tradition, so they have slightly different services, still based around Eucharist, but it looks different because they were so far away for such a long time. But so the Anglican Communion is a family of churches. The mother is the Church of England, and for the most part, all of them have broken off from the Church of England at one point. The sole and most recent exception to that, that's not fully true, actually. The Anglican Episcopal Church of Sudan had no actual link to England or to the Episcopal Church. There's a lot of churches in the Caribbean, Brazil, South America, and Central America that broke off of us rather than the Church of England. The one exception being Belize, because that's still a British territory, or it's a crown realm. So the king is still the king of Belize.
What's the red one?
The red one is the Bonn Agreement, so Old Catholic. There is a break-off of the Catholic Church in Utrecht that said we're the actual Pope. And they still had the historic episcopacy, so they still had a lineage that we could tell going all the way down to the apostles. So we recognize them also as having having that. So we can recognize their services, their sacraments as valid. That becomes a big sticking point, is valid sacraments. So the blue and red don't recognize the See of Canterbury, but they recognize us as having a historic episcopacy. So they're not a part of the See of Canterbury. They don't see the ABC, Archbishop of Canterbury, as having any spiritual leadership. And the way that we kind of work that, and again, this will be a Class 5 thing, is the Chicago-Lambeth Quadrilateral. And that basically states that you believe in the Holy Scriptures, the Nicene Creed, the historic episcopacy, and the sacraments of baptism and Eucharist. And with the historic episcopacy, locally adapted. So you just need to have it, but if you have a certain way of doing it that might be different than the rest of the church, that's fine as long as you have that historic episcopacy. And so this is how the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion engage in communion conversations. And that is referring to how do we see each other. So us and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or ELCA, are in full communion. So an ELCA pastor can become a rector of an Episcopal church, just like I can go to an ELCA church and be their pastor. We just use a different term. When making that agreement, they did not have the historic episcopacy, but they did have bishops. It was cut off at some point in time, so we gave it to them because our bishops have the magic hands. I mean, it literally gets that pedantic sometimes, but we had the magic hands, and so for every ordination or consecration of an ELCA bishop, an Episcopal bishop needs to be there for like the next 30 years until all of them have received it from us to some degree. It doesn't always bode well for us engaging in ecumenical conversations because we have this super special thing. We are willing to give it out, but that can be barriers at some point. But that is how we generally engage, and we'll discuss that more in class 5. But we are the third largest contingent of Christians in the world, the Anglican Communion. First is being Roman Catholic, next being Orthodox broadly, and then us, the Anglican Communion. It helps that the sun never set on the English Empire. That's pretty much the sole reason why we are the third largest.
To C.S. Lewis's books and runs by George.
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about his childhood, he refers to it as when he's in boarding school, he goes to, he calls it the Anglican Catholic Church.
Yes.
So I know Catholic is universal, but I thought maybe it has a different meaning. It seems like for me, growing up much more Protestant,
Yep.
that I love this via media because it seems like it is right in the middle, but for me it feels personally, this book was far much more about Catholics than simply than Catholics.
So Lori's question was, the C.S. Lewis mentions this term called Anglo-Catholic. That is generally a reference to a movement in the 19th century to restore Eucharist as the primary Sunday service, and to go back to a much ancient ritual of Eucharist that wasn't being practiced really in the Episcopal Church at the time. During the 19th century, the primary service for a Sunday was morning prayer. Communion happened once a month after morning prayer. Most people didn't show up. We still have some of this old language from that time within our canons. Like, you have to receive communion 4 times to be a vestry member at minimum in the national canons, which is absurd because that's 1 month basically for most people when you attend St. Stephen's. You'll meet that requirement. But at the time, it was far less frequent. It was once a month. Most people didn't show up. So they would do it once a quarter, stay for the extra 15, 20 minutes to do the Eucharist service, usually in a side chapel, and then you met your obligation for Eucharist. But Anglo-Catholic was trying to reassert that as the primary mode of Sunday worship. They wanted to bring back vestments, because at the time, choir dress was mostly worn, so cassock, the black gown, surplice with the long white bands. They might put on a stole, so that's the neck scarf, or a tippet, which doesn't have any liturgical purpose other than stating you have a degree. So Anglo-Catholic are people who tend to err more towards the ritualistic, but of a much more ancient service than almost a medieval style service. And that became very prominent in the 19th century during this revival period. So again, class 5. Are there any questions, Patty? It sounded like you may have had a question. No, okay. Catholic, yeah. And we'll slightly be talking about that, but there's no centralized Orthodox faith. They're much more like us in that they might recognize the ecumenical patriarch as being the first among equals, but he doesn't have say in how the Church of Serbia runs its church, how the Church of Ukraine runs its church. So in some sense, us and the Orthodox are far more alike than us and Roman Catholics. That's a theme to remember. It's kind of throughout. But so when did the Anglican Church start? So I put a whole bunch of different pictures. This is from, this one is Thomas of Becket on the, what is that, your top left? Yes. Here's Henry VIII at a council of churches, Elizabeth. This is the first Lambeth Conference. This is St. Edmund, one of the Anglo-Saxon kings. And this is the most recent Lambeth Conference in 2022. When did the Anglican Church start? Any guesses? No?
If you really put the idea of succession of bishops, is that how do you process?
That's a good, so Chuck mentioned that if you really believe in the historic episcopacy and apostolic succession, it would have started all the way down with the apostles. Yes, I would agree to a certain extent. But I would say it's with this guy, Augustine of Canterbury, the first Archbishop of Canterbury. So this is an icon of him. Oops. This is an icon of him. He made it into the region of Kent, now in the city that we now call Canterbury, in about 597 CE. And he was the first one to become bishop and posthumously the Archbishop of Canterbury. But so I think first, though, we need to understand how the British Isles were before Augustine got there. So this is one of the oldest mosaics of Christ in England. It's in a church in Dorset. So that's a Cornwall region, right? Yes. My English geography isn't the greatest. But so this is, you see the Chi Rho above Christ's head, and then that's a thistle, it looks like, and maybe an olive branch. So Rome invaded England in 43 CE. They took control over from the Celts/Britons at the time. The primary religion during 43 was was paganism, or a polytheistic one of Roman deities and Celtic deities. There's some indication that they tried to blend the two. There was some common Roman Celtic shrines at the time. But when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and made that the state religion, Christianity did in fact make its way all the way to England. So we can see instances around 300-ish, or even 200. So Christians were making their way to the English Isles, or the British Isles, even before it became the state religion. But when it became the state religion, Christianity came to the British Isles, and stuff like this mosaic is proof of that and how widespread. But Rome left in 410. So all connection to the Roman Church was lost. There was no trade, no regular communications from the mainland to the British Isles, so it became very insular. There was still Christianity, though. It still fostered. Ireland was the one primarily bringing bishops, sending monks, but it did develop its own unique flair. In that Christian life was not centered around secular clergy. Secular means of the world. So bishops and priests were considered secular clergy. And then there's monastic clergy, clergy who were monks who were also ordained as priests or bishops, who took on the role of being local parish priests and such. They still lived, though, with a community. And so the Christianity that the Celts, once the Rome left, became centered around monasteries. So it took much more of a monastic-centered approach. The monasteries became the center of their spiritual life. And that was mostly just in the Western kingdoms, closest to Ireland, because Ireland at this time was mostly Christian. So they would send bishops over, they would send monks, they would build monasteries and such to maintain some sort of presence on English and in England and Wales. But mostly it reverted back to paganism through the Anglo-Saxon belief system. So Norse, I believe, is their primary form of paganism. So then this guy, Augustine of Canterbury. Again, the first Archbishop of Canterbury. There's not much known about him. He's believed to have come from a wealthy family. He was born in Rome on November 13th, 534 CE, and he was a Benedictine monk. He was so much so he was even the prior of his abbey, St. Andrew's Abbey in Rome. It's now a huge monastery in Rome, and there's still monks there today, but it's named after Pope Gregory the Great and St. Andrew. And he died on May 26, 604 or 5. But how did he become the Archbishop of Rome? He was never Archbishop of Rome. There is no Archbishop of Rome. Archbishop of Canterbury. This guy, that's Pope Gregory the Great. He was Pope from 590 to 604. And he was also a Benedictine monk of the Abbey of St. Andrew in Rome. Who else was from there? But he was a big he got the title great or the honorific great after his name. He was kind of a big figure in the early, quarter of Christianity, really expanded Roman authority and the Roman Church across Europe, kind of taking over the vacuum that Rome left. After the empire left Rome and allowed the Visigoths to sack it, the Pope kind of became the primary civil authority within Rome and the former empire, in the West at least. Rome was still flourishing in the East. In Constantinople, we just changed its name to Byzantium. But the Pope became the primary central figure. And even at this time, the Pope still had to be approved by the emperor in Constantinople. The clergy of Rome would elect the new Pope, but still had to be approved by the emperor. But he saw this big expansion of his authority over the church. And there is this old story, which is not true at all, about wanting to start a mission in England. And the old myth or folklore is that he was walking around Rome and was at a slave market and saw these pretty, gorgeous, tall, blonde-haired slaves. And he asked them, "Where are you from?" And he heard, "We are from the angels." They meant we are Anglican or Anglo-Saxon. We're from the land of the Angles. And so he wanted to send a mission to bring Christianity to the English shores once again. It's false because there's some indication that we knew that England still existed and that there was Christianity. It was just connection had been lost over over a century of no trade and a lack of an empire to kind of facilitate commerce and regular transit of messages and stuff to England. But that is the old myth or folklore of why Pope Gregory wanted to send a mission to England. But he sent his former prior. He may have still technically been a part of the order. It's kind of fuzzy if he left when he became pope or if he was still under monastic rule, and Andrew was his prior, Augustine. But he asked Augustine and 40 other monks to go do a mission in 595. So it took 2 whole years for them to get from Rome to the shores of Kent. And so when he arrived in 597, and he was warmly welcomed by King Ethelbert. But there was something off. When he met his wife, he discovered she was already Christian. Ethelbert was not. He was pagan. But his wife, Bertha, was in fact Christian. It was a political marriage. She is from the Merovingians, which were kings in modern-day France and Germany. And so as kind of a way of seizing political power and supporting his own efforts in England, he married Bertha, and he allowed her to bring a bishop and to allow her to practice her own religion. And so the bishop she brought was Ludhard. I think I said that correctly. But anyway, Augustine found out that there's already Christianity, some from the mainland in Europe, from what they called Gaul, or the Franks, and Celtic Christianity. There were a couple bishops that he did engage with who were part of the Celtic Christianity from monasteries. And so he was allowed to, okay, that was a weird noise. King Ethelbert did allow him to set up a place to make a monastery for him and the monks, and to start a church. So here's some information about Celtic Christianity and how it differed. So again, due to the isolation from Rome, Christian communities still existed, but it lost a lot of contact with Rome. Their churches and spirituality were again centered by monasteries rather than bishops and dioceses, though they did have bishops. Ireland sent them, again, to the Western kingdoms because it was closer. And then how it differed from the Roman Christianity. They had a very different date for calculating Easter. In about 370, Constantinius declared that we need to separate our date from the Jewish date for Passover. So we made our own wonky rule of stating the first full moon after the vernal equinox is when the Sunday following that is when Easter is. It's slightly more convoluted, but that's the gist of it. And that's how we calculate when Easter is in the Western Church. Calendars were off, though. And so within 100 years, we could already tell that we were missing the actual spring equinox. We could tell where the sun was, but because it's this weird lunisolar calculation where it depends on the moon and our position on the solar calendar, Easter kept on diverging. The church in Rome made a new calendar, or an updated calendar, and the people in the British Isles never really got it, that they knew that their date was diverging. So they had a different date for Easter. Again, though, we really didn't have a concrete date for Easter until the 1700s. Like the Julian calendar kept on failing us, and we saw the same drifting of Easter. And it wasn't until the Gregorian calendar, which made not just a leap year, but corrected it, because the Earth's rotation is so weird, that Easter was pretty much settled for the Western Church, but it took Protestants another like 50 years, because we were not going to listen to the Pope to have us dictate when Easter was. So like, it's not an uncommon thing for Easter to be a complicated matter. I mean, us in the Orthodox Church still have diverging dates for Easter and Christmas, because they still use the Julian calendar. And so, like, last year was the first time in like 15 years that Orthodox and East and Western Christianity shared the same day for Easter. So calendars are very convoluted, but it was an issue for the Roman Church that the Celts had a different day of calculating Easter. They had a different monastic tonsure. So a tonsure is a haircut. In the Roman Church, they would cut the crown of their head. That would be bald, and then leave hair all around that, but the top of their head was bald. We don't really know what the Celtic tonsure looks like. We have some very bad, like one or two very bad carvings from the Anglo-Saxons that we can't exactly tell how they did it, but they had a different tonsure, and for some reason that became a very big sticking point within the church. We can be peculiar about very many things, but that was one of them, that their tonsure was wrong. Another difference was how they did penitence, or their penitential order. In the Roman Church at the time, if you needed to confess your sins, you would come on a Sunday and announce it to the entirety of the congregation. It was a public, I have sinned, please absolve me, bishop, please absolve me, priest. There is no such thing as a private confession. The Celtics had private confession. There where we got confessionals, and they saw confession and penitence as a matter between you, the priest, and God. So their form of confession was different than the rest of the church. Much more pastoral, I would say, in many ways. And those are primarily the big differences, other than the one I mentioned before, monastic-centered versus secular-centered. So the conundrum, then. Augustine made his way all the way to England to come and bring Christianity there, to form a mission to convert the Anglo-Saxons. But Christianity was already there. So we actually have letters between Augustine and Pope Gregory. And one of the questions he asked, and there's two different sources that have this question. Oops. It is Registrum Epistolarum, Book 11, Letter 64, or Liberus Responsium. But Augustine asks Pope Gregory in this letter, since there is but one faith, why are the uses of churches so different? One uses Mass of being observed in the Roman Church and another in churches of Gaul. So he asks Pope Gregory, why are there such differences? If we're all one faith, why aren't we worshiping the same? And Pope Gregory's response, you know, my brother, the custom of the Roman Church in which you are well trained. If you have found anything in either the Roman or the Gallican, another word for Celtic, or any other church in which may be more acceptable to Almighty God, I am willing that you carefully make choice of the same and diligently teach the English church, which is yet new in the faith, whatever you can gather from the several churches. So there's this message from Pope Gregory of take what's best. you know our tradition, the Roman tradition. Take what's good in the Celtic tradition or the Gaulish tradition, because France had a slightly different way of worshiping as well. But take what's best and make something new. Make something that is pleasing to Almighty God. Like, use your own discernment to find what is best and pleasing that the Anglo-Saxons can use in their new faith, in their new church. Did that happen though? Oh, no. Throughout Augustine's missionary mission in Kent, he sought to change and correct the inconsistencies in the Celtic Rite. He did recognize the authority of the Celtic bishops. There's another question where he asks, do these bishops have any authority? And Pope Gregory said, yes, though they aren't a part of our, fully a part, they did recognize the Celtic bishops as being bishops. But Augustine did try to make them change their date for Easter. That wasn't fully accepted until about 664 at the Whitby Synod, where the Roman Church basically told the Celtic bishops, you're doing this or else. And so that was on Pentecost Day. So that's why Pentecost can sometimes be called Whitby Sunday. Oh, there's a coyote. I just saw a furry thing walk. Yep. He did, in fact, make them switch their monastic tonsure. But then there were some changes that we can see in the English church. So one caveat, we do not know, or we do not have any record of what Mass Augustine was using. We assume it was Roman in origin, but we don't know what changes he may have done to follow the Celtic tradition. That's lost to history, probably, in some degree. But Rome had this had this habit of going to a new place and taking other churches' traditions and making them their own, adapting their own custom to that. And so the Celtic Penitential Order of having private confession became the primary way of confession throughout the entirety of the Roman Church. They got rid of the public confession and started making confessionals, and to make it a sacrament between the penitent and their priest. And then monasticism did play a huge role in the English church. For however many dioceses they had, more of their dioceses were monastic, and cathedrals were monastic cathedrals, in that they had abbeys or monasteries or nunneries attached to them. Canterbury had both a male and female Benedictine monastery attached to them. Westminster Abbey played a pivotal role in England. That's not a cathedral, but it's still a monastic order that played an important role in the history of the UK, especially after the Battle of Hastings. Durham had monasteries attached to it. So more so than the mainland, monasteries, monastic cathedrals played much more of an important role in their development and played a huge role in the English spirituality and their own spiritual development. That is something also to take note of monasteries' importance to the spiritual life in England compared to the rest of Europe. So I guess then, the the two major themes that I think are really important to kind of keep track as we are going, because a lot of these themes are never resolved when it comes to history. They just show up in different ways. But the discernment of the middle way. While Augustine and the Roman Church could have done a lot better at taking Pope Gregory's advice, there is still some sort of sense of the via media there, that we're discerning two different traditions and what is the best way that this tradition should be, and kind of finding that middle ground of finding the most acceptable way that is good for everyone, that we can all agree upon. And so while Rome did impart a lot of authority to get the Celtic Church in line with them, you can still see some concessions in the actual practice of the Anglican Church at that time, and how that led to the rest of, the Roman Church as a whole. Then is authority. Who has authority? Rome is inserting authority. Rome asserting its authority elsewhere comes up again and again and again. We'll be talking about that next week. But also, who has the power to dictate faith? Is that the Pope or local bishops? That also comes up again and again. We might still, maybe not with the Pope, but we are still kind of dictating that of who has ultimate authority within Anglican Church provinces. Yeah, Lori.
So, when all these decisions are being made, does anybody ever actually go to the Gospels and read what Jesus says to determine? Because it seems so, when I've been one this week listening to the Gospels, it seems so, it's good to fall asleep. I feel like I'm really listening, for at least a year or so, and I just start to go back, and it just seems, in the sense of it just seems that all the preachings of Jesus are antithetical to any Christian church. The way that I'm not talking about love, etc. Because, and I am so drawn to the Episcopal Church because I think that the enactment of ritual is really important. But when I read that, it just seems to be this huge dichotomy. So when people are deciding this, do they go back to the scriptures, or is it just through tradition they make the decisions, or through power plays, or what kind of informs the decisions? Answer in one minute.
So Lori's question was, what kind of informs the traditions back then of how the church was functioning? It would be easier if I just did this. So at least how the Episcopal Church engages with that. Anglicanism also reflects balance in its devotion to scripture, tradition, and reason. Scripture does play an important role, but it's also, unlike evangelical churches, it's not the ultimate authority. There are other things like tradition, I guess in some sense also like power, probably in the Roman Church's case, that do play a role in how some of these decisions were made. Yeah, and I guess you can also use scripture to support your side for just about anything. Like the power of scripture isn't in what's written, but the interpretation of it. That's what my biblical scholars professor, Dr. Julie Faith Parker would always say, is the power is not in the words written, but in how you interpret them. So, as well, there might be a whole bunch of things about loving your neighbor. There might be something in like Isaiah that says something slightly different or supports the cause for a unified church, or I guess Paul maybe more so, for a unified church. Yeah. Bad interpretation of Paul, but yes. Susan.
This is great. It would be really nice to have a copy of that law, because it's kind of hard to read. And it
Yeah.
would be nice to look at it.
I can make sure all of these would be in a shared file on the recording. But also, again, if you just type in "what is Anglicanism Episcopal Glossary," this will come up. It's a part of the church website. But again, earlier today, it seemed to be down. So maybe check tomorrow.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Are there any questions, especially online?
All good.
Okay. Any others? That was a lot of information. I totally understand.
What is this that you need to know to be a good Anglican?
Oh,
I know.
none. Matt took one history class. I took 3. But I'm way more of a history nut. Yes.
Well, 2 years ago, I think, we visited the people in Wales, St. David's,
Yep.
and it was absolutely amazing to walk into that and realize that it had been a Roman Catholic church,
Mm-hmm.
and now it isn't. You know, but it's all there, history,
Yeah.
in the same building. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that should have been obvious to me, but I don't know.
I mean, St. David's might even be older before it was Roman Catholic. Like, St. David's existed when it was a Celtic cathedral. It also had monasteries. I guess like a short summary of like what the church looked like before Rome started asserting a mass amount of authority was more or less how we look in the Anglican Communion or the Orthodox do now. Like the Church of Serbia, they have a patriarch. That patriarch is the primate of the church, but has say in what happens in all of the churches in Serbia. They recognize Bartholomew as the first among equals, will engage with them as the ecumenical patriarch, but Bartholomew, that is the Archbishop of Constantinople, has been for the last 33 years. I think he's been there as long as I've been alive. Sorry if that made people feel old. But Bartholomew can't tell Serbia what to do. That's not true in the Roman Church. Rome dictates who's going to be bishop, though there has been instances of infighting. For a long time, France had something called Gallicanism, which basically meant the bishops of France picked bishops. The Pope had no say. They were in communion with the Pope, but until like 1907, the Pope could not pick the Bishop of Paris or the Archbishop of Paris. It was chosen by the bishops themselves. At one point, it was chosen by the king, but when the king was beheaded, the bishops just kind of took that over. They didn't give the authority to Rome. So Rome has always taken more centralized authority that I'm not certain should be allowed. It's probably why I'm Anglican and not Roman. many reasons, but yeah, so one could argue that the Roman Church is slightly out of line for that, of taking centralized authority. But St. David's is old enough to have been a Celtic church that, with bishops, that they all recognize each other's authority, but was not overseen by the Pope. Mm-hmm.
This isn't something that works.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you tell us what the themes are of the other 4 sessions?
Yes, so next week, it's 2 different stories, Thomas à Becket and Henry VIII. After that, it is Elizabeth. After that, week 4 will be kind of the founding of the Episcopal Church, because that was the first time a church broke off from the Church of England. And kind of, I guess again, not fully true. Scotland always plays this oddball role in the Anglican Communion, because the Church of Scotland is not in the Anglican Communion, but the Scottish Episcopal Church is, but that's not the official Church of Scotland, where the Church of Scotland is. But the Episcopal Church became the first one to officially break off from the Church of England. And it kind of changes how the Church of England engaged in the rest of its colonial activities, because it became very obvious what they did in the Americas was not good, because we had a whole revolution. That changed how they engaged with the rest of the colonies quite a bit. And then the last is kind of the 19th century that really shaped us into becoming a communion, due to colonialism, but then kind of how we adapted into the communion we are today, why it looks the way it does, how it's almost, as I described earlier, in some sense more ancient than how the Roman Church is formulated, and what that means for us today, and how some of these issues that we are bringing up are still issues that we're dealing with or not dealing with, because they keep on being issues throughout the rest of the communion. But yeah. Well, that's all I have for you. Bye, everyone.